present time in Israel, there is a poster campaign. On the side of buses, stuck to lampposts, are posters depicting an aged rabbi, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And written above or below or beside him are the words Hamelech, Hamashiach, the King, the Messiah. Now, I don't know whether these Lubavitcher Jews have it deliberately in mind or whether it's just an accident of wording, but those words, the King, the Messiah, remind me of the messianic prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, where Daniel is told that there will be a certain period of time until Messiah the Prince. Apocalyptic books like Daniel and Revelation use symbols to convey their message. They also appear to use a time scale or time code, which is given to us as a day standing for a year. Now, in the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, Daniel is told that there will be 490 years, 70 times 7, or 70 weeks. 490 years cut off, set aside, put apart for his people. Now, it's all very well knowing how long a period is, but it's not much help unless you know the start point or the end point, or both. And in the case of the prophecy of Daniel chapter 9, we are given a start point. According to the prophecy, the period of 70 weeks is to begin when a command is given to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, I can't tell you exactly what those words meant to Daniel. All I can tell you is what they mean to me, which is that the period of time is to begin when a command is given not only to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, but also to restore it to its former position as the capital of an independent state. The Bible tells us of 3 different commands that were given to rebuild Jerusalem. The first of these was given in the first year of Cyrus, the king who conquered Babylon in the year 539 BC. But there was no mention there of Jerusalem and Judea being any other than a part of the Persian Empire, just one province among many. It's not until you come to the decree given in Ezra chapter 7 that we find any mention of Jerusalem being given a separate status. In that decree, Ezra is told that he is to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, but in addition he is instructed that he is to appoint a governor. He is to govern according to Jewish law. And that permission to rule according to Jewish law not only gave them permission to teach the law to those who didn't know it, presumably non-Jews living in the area, but even to enforce it with the death penalty. That sounds very much like Judea being given an independent status, ruled not by Persian laws but by Jewish law, even up to the death penalty. That's independence. The only trouble is that there were several Persian kings by the name of Artaxerxes. And so we're left with the question of which Artaxerxes is meant in Ezra chapter 7. Well, I won't go into all the arguments here. They'll probably bore you silly. You can find them set out in various books. But it seems to me that the most logical, most probable of these Artaxerxeses, his 7th year was in 457 BC. The only trouble is that if you look this king up in an encyclopedia, you will find that his 7th year is in fact 456. So why do we say 457? The answer lies in the question of chronology. Persians and Jews had different New Year's days. As you know, our New Year's Day is January the 1st. But if you live anywhere near a Chinese community, you will be aware of the throwing of fireworks and of dragon dancers prancing around the streets to celebrate their New Year. which is at an entirely different time to ours. And it was the same with the Jews. They had one New Year's Day, the Persians had another, the Egyptians had yet another. We wouldn't know which of these many New Years to use were it not for the fact that there was a Jewish colony down in southern Egypt at Aswan on the island of Elephantine, where, believe it or not, they actually had a temple to Yahweh or Jehovah. That temple was destroyed in a riot, and they appealed to the authorities in Jerusalem for permission to rebuild their temple. And what follows, according to the papyri that were found at Elephantine, is an unhappy story of bureaucracy, ineptitude, inertia, and just plain filibustering by the Jewish authorities, for the last thing that Ezra and his folk wanted was to see a rival temple anywhere outside Jerusalem. Eventually, in desperation, the Jews of Elephantine appealed to the Samaritan leaders, to men whose names are familiar to us from the book of Nehemiah, like Sanballat, the Samaritan leader. And from them they received the necessary permission. The temple was rebuilt, though soon afterwards it was finally and completely destroyed, and as far as we know, the Jews of Elephantine were wiped out as the Egyptians regained their independence. However, this correspondence, fascinating though it is not what gives us our clue. Among the papyri were a number of marriage contracts, and in order to be legal, these had to be accurately dated. Some of them were double dated in terms of the Jewish year and the Egyptian year, others in terms of the Jewish year and the Persian year. But there were a few that were triple dated in terms of the Jewish, the Egyptian, and the Persian years. And it is from these that we are able to tell that the Jews of Elephantine dated the reigns of Persian kings according to their own calendar, with their own New Year's Day. And it is highly likely that Ezra, a Jew, would have done the same thing. And so because of this question of dating, we do not accept the date of the Britannicas, the encyclopedias. We accept the date that Ezra would have used. And that means that the 7th year of Artaxerxes, according to Jewish reckoning, was 457 BC. Now the prophecy goes on to say that although 490 years are set aside for the Jews, for Daniel's people, there would be a shorter period of 483 years, 69 weeks, until Messiah the Prince, the Anointed One, the Prince. There is only one date given in the New Testament. We wish there were more. There's no date given for the birth of Christ, which is why we're free to celebrate Jesus' birth on December the 25th, even though it is highly unlikely that Jesus was born at that time of year, or that shepherds would be out in the fields covered with snow watching their flocks. We don't even know the dates of Paul's conversion or his death. There is only one date which is given in the New Testament, and that is in Luke chapter 3, where St. Luke tells us the time when John the Baptist began his ministry. And he dates it in terms of the Roman emperor, of the local ruler, of the high priest, and various other means. Of course, they didn't have AD and BC in those days. And once again, if we apply Jewish reckoning, we are able to say that that date is the equivalent in our terms of 27 AD. You're going to say, so what? Because if you whip out your calculator and take 457 from 483, you're likely to find 26 is the answer. But you see, you have to add in a year when you're crossing from BC to AD. The reason is very simple, though most people don't realize it. There was no year 0. In mathematics, if you add 4 onto -2, that takes you to +2, right? But in years, from February of -2 BC, 1 year takes you to February of -1, 1 BC. A second year takes you to +1, 1 AD. The third year takes you to 2 AD, and the fourth year takes you to 3 AD. So -2 plus 4 equals 3. And so you have to add a year when you're crossing from BC to AD. And that's why we say 27 and not 26. So John the Baptist began his ministry in 27 AD, probably around about the spring of that year. And it may be as little as 6 months later, Jesus came to him and asked to be baptized. And we all know the story of what happened then. According to the Gospels, Jesus was baptized, put down under the water, and as he came up out of the water, the heavens opened, and the Holy Ghost descended upon him in the form of a dove, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son," acknowledging Jesus as the Son of God. This was when the Messiah was anointed, when Jesus was anointed as the promised Messiah. Well, we've talked about the 69 weeks. That means there's 1 week left out of the 70. And the prophecy tells us about that week. It says that in the middle of the week, the Messiah, the promised one, would be cut off, but not for himself. Cut off is a term used in the Bible to mean executed. And not for himself means either not because of anything he's done or not for his own benefit. Either would apply to Jesus. For Jesus was executed not for any crime that he had committed, and not for his own benefit, but for ours. Jesus died for us. And the middle of the week is 3.5 days, isn't it? A week is 7 days, so half of that is 3.5 days. And we are told by those who have studied the matter that Jesus' ministry probably lasted for 3 and a bit years. And he was crucified in the spring at Passover time, 3.5 years after his baptism. Jesus died, not for himself, but for us. How very different from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I don't know all that much about him. He may have been a good man. Certainly it's to his credit that he never claimed to be the Messiah, though on the other hand, he never denied it either. His followers are certainly clear that he was the King, the Messiah. But the poor old man died a few years ago. And although his followers delayed the event as long as they could, eventually they had to bury him. And they still keep watch over his tomb, hoping that one day he will rise again to life. I'm speaking these words to you in the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, a tomb which many people believe is the actual tomb of Christ. Whether it is or isn't, I don't want to say. But certainly this is a beautiful garden, a beautiful surrounding, typical of the place where Jesus was laid. From time to time, at Tel Aviv airport, as I pass through, Lubavitcher Jews will come to me and try to tell me about their Messiah. Now I have an answer for them, because I can point to the tomb and say, my Messiah rose on the 3rd day. What about yours?